Welcome to the Rebels Edge. You wanted John, you got me. It's not what you wanted, but you got Pete, and that's great. I can't wait to get into all the action today on Liberation Day. A lot of people are afraid to try and call the bottom. I'm not. I'm not afraid to be wrong. I'll tell you what I think coming up.
Well, if it wasn't for technical difficulties today, we wouldn't have a whole lot going on. I'll tell you what, it's not a difficulty, is watching the market moving around and bouncing around, and we got the right guy with us, Justin. Justin is an up-and-comer who's been incredible for us. We're really excited about all the things that he's doing with us at Market Rebellion, and I can't wait to start this thing up. So should we hit some macro stuff, man?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, is there anything any more macro than what's in front of us this afternoon? That's President Trump, the tariffs. I mean, there is nothing like it. I actually can view this as something that's, hey, this is bigger than the Fed. This is bigger than earnings season. This is as big as it gets. And we're going to all be watching, of course, right after the close, right there, 4 o'clock Eastern time. We're going to be looking to see what exactly do the tariffs really mean? How big is it? How targeted is it? Or is it not? And is there something else that we're going to hear about that we don't know about? That's the big storyline, right, Justin?
Yeah, and also speaking of storylines, I'm just going to say it. I hate headlines sometimes. Yesterday, we see a headline right on the front of a 4-letter network that won't be named. Trump's tariff gambit will raise the stakes for a fragile economy. The same moment, Goolsby's coming out and saying, hey, the hard data for the economy is actually pretty good. But consumer sentiment is almost cratering, he says. So, I wonder why sentiment is cratering so hard. It's probably this weird onslaught of headlines that don't really represent the market. I like to look past this and just look at statistics. Historically speaking, when we have a full correction 6 months from the top, 10% down, and then we have 2 back-to-back 90% up days in the S&P, 2 months later, all the way back since 1933, we've been up 100% of the time. That's my macro minute.
Well said, man. Really well said. And sometimes, you know, the leanings of different folks out there or whatever, it's like, what are you doing? Let's just stick to the facts. I mean, this is one area where we can look and go, here's the number. Here's what they're doing. All of that. Anyway, hopefully they can get themselves up. My next thing for the fantastic side of things is the volatility index. And I talk about it all the time, and I think it's for all the right reasons. There were a bunch of people, Justin, years ago, you weren't even born, but I was on TV talking about the VIX, and guys said, it doesn't mean anything. Really? Huh, that's kind of interesting. I think it tells us all about what's going on in the markets. And it's only up, well, 20+% or whatever, 22% in the last 5 days. It's been an incredible ride. It's gone up. It's pulled back. It's gone up. We were at 18. Then we jump up to 25. Then we pull back again. Here we are as we're approaching the end of the day. We still got a few hours, but here we are sitting there at about 2160, something close to that. I think 22 is also a very fair level for the VIX. So that's what I think about the fantastic futures. Volatility, baby.
Yeah, by the way, those same people who probably said, oh, the VIX doesn't matter are probably the same guys buying the VIX out of fear when it's at 40 on a bad day and saying, oh, wow, why isn't it working for me? My VIX future is the 10-year combined with just bonds. 10-year actually got as low as 4.112 today. Pretty low. It's only been that low one other time on March 4th. And prior to that, the last time that it was that low was on October 21st. That is pretty low. It looks pretty bearish out there for the 10-year. If I'm looking to make a trade off of that, I'm not doing anything with that. I'm probably buying the TLT for something like 2027, because what do you think rates are going to do when we have a maybe different Fed president who is up for a new renomination in 2026. Mm-hmm. I would bet that person's probably going to end up being quite a bit more dovish. So
I hear you, man. I think you're right about that. All right, let's jump in right into it. We've got 4 stocks that we're going to hit. We're going to hit a little bit of sports. We're going to have a little bit of fun with that. But Grifols is number 1. Now, this is pretty interesting because you've got Brookfield out there. They're advancing these targets to take over once again. Now, this failed last year, actually. Back in November last year, it just sort of started to fall apart. Then it failed. Brookfield now is looking like they're going to have a number that's a little bit more palatable, $7 billion. I think that's another 500 million than they had previously. There's a hell of a lot of debt here, Justin. It's kind of uncomfortable, but here's my storyline. Forget everything I just said. Investment banking, Morgan Stanley's in charge. If this thing gets done, well, once again, investment banking and that whole sector, I think, is a lot of room to the upside.
Yeah, okay. 2 quick points. Number one, I just said that in last night's Rebel Roundup. I said, hey, we're looking at all these IPOs. They're great. Newsmax is ripping. Let me tell you who the real winner is. Investment banking. It's exactly what I said. I love that take. Number two, yeah, I love when we see buyout rumors and then they get paired with UOA. Pete and I were just talking about whether or not there was UOA here. I'm just going to go ahead and assume I'm okay to say it out loud because there was a bunch. And March 14th, they came in and bought the April 8th in GR. For with the stock at 572. Where is it trading today? 736. Those are still a little bit out of the money, but they got them for just 25 cents. It was part of a spread. They capped their upside. Looks good. They came back in again on the 21st, bought the April 7s with the stock at 668. Those were also very cheap. Those are now in the money, and maybe they've hit a little bit more of that activity today as well. So yeah, love when you see UOA paired with a buyout rumor.
Right. Gotta love it. Gotta love it. All right. Cytokinetics. This one's pretty interesting because it's late stage biopharma name. I love that space. I was pre-med. I studied this. And I also think you want to have some volatility. These things are where the volatility really belongs. But I'll tell you what, Edgewise came out. And unfortunately for Edgewise, they had some pretty successful with their latest trials. But the problem was there also was about 14% of those that were part of this whole thing, the treatment that they were putting out there for the heart, unfortunately, that had, well, a side effect that was not so good. And because of that, Edgewise just got absolutely slapped to the downside today. I mean, crushed pretty good to the downside. But Cytokinetics actually, because they're in competition with one another, had a pretty nice lift. So it's interesting to see how this whole thing unfolds. It's part of the world of biotech and everything else. It is very, very difficult, this whole process, stage 1, 2, 3, all of that when you're going through the different trials. And unfortunately, even though it was very, very positive, that one issue that they had, it's a big issue, is really dragging down Edgewise today.
Yeah, totally agree. So I love biotech too. It's something that we've got to bond over. You have a really great story about biotech trade. I talked about one the other day in the Rebel Roundup using catalyst dates as part of the thesis in Compass Therapeutics. The next day it was up 17.5%. And it's not that you're supposed to jump and go into these ahead of time. It's that you either lean on the UOA or you just read the report in the morning because the report was great. And then the stock just worked its way up. That's excellent. I love to see this move in Cytokinetics. And if you want a similar way to do Cytokinetics to what we talked about in Compass with the Rebel Roundup, you should just know that they have what's called a PDUFA target. That's their action date for getting a drug approved, essentially, for one of their big drugs, Aficamten, I think. It's one of their big drugs for September 26th, 2025. You think earnings are great, you should see what happens on these approval dates to the upside or the downside.
Yep, that is a huge thing. So keep that date in mind, everybody. All right, Incino is next. And what about this particular name? Software maker, cloud-based, all the rest of it. Well, what did they do? Well, there's an expression for it that I'm not going to use, but it has something to do with what you do in the bed. And that's exactly what these guys have done. They missed on the top. They missed on the bottom. They missed on their guidance. I mean, what else could you possibly do? There's a real reason why these guys, Justin, had about 10 to 20% short interest because there's a lot of folks that are betting against them. Well, at what point do they start to buy back? None of us know the answer for that one. We'll be keeping a very close eye on it. But when you've got a stock that's down 24%, and it's down there at 2150, where you've got a 52-week low of 18 and the high of 43. I would say it's getting pretty close to that 52-week low, and this is something where do they start to cover at any point? That's something I'd be watching very closely. Otherwise, if they don't cover, this stock is going to establish a new 52-week low.
Yeah, and actually, so they did rip to a 52-week low today. I think they're up a little bit off of that, but they were down as low as 1875 today. And I think before that, their 52-week low was like $27. That is rough. This is just a sign that, sometimes you want to buy the dip in stocks. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes the whole rest of the market could come back. Incino probably has a lot more work to do before maybe it needs to make that comeback.
Yeah.
I'd be careful about that.
We got one last stock before we get into sports, and I'm going to hit it right now. It's Robinhood. Now, this one's pretty interesting because you take a look at Robinhood, you look at where it's been and how well it's traded at times so far year to date. It's been new highs. It was up there over $66 back on February 14th, Valentine's Day. Pretty nice, right? Well, now it's trading about $42 from that $66 level, 66 plus. Tariffs are going to be a big deal. That's part of it. We know there's trading that's going on that should be pretty great. But is that going to affect any of the global trading? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Here's the one thing I would say, and I think you're more of a chart guy than me, but every once in a while I look at these charts and I talk to Brian McCormick here at Market Rebellion, and I will tell you this. When you put up Bitcoin right now and you put up Hood right now, Robinhood right now, those charts are almost identical in lockstep. And so that's something to keep an eye on. So if you're not always looking at Robinhood, maybe take a look over at Bitcoin and go back and forth a little bit. But it's going to be very interesting. If Bitcoin starts to get any elevation, I'd keep an eye on Robinhood. I think this one's going to take off.
I completely agree. There's something in charts that we talk about where we look at what's called a thin structure retracement. This is when we only spent maybe a couple minutes in a certain area and then we never got back there. As we start to make our way back there, you usually see the auction market start to retrace that structure to decide, hey, do we like this price? Did we need to come back here or not? That thin structure for Hood in its second week of trading went all the way up to $85 per share. That, crazy enough, is actually where I think Hood is heading in. I would at least say this year. They've got a great business model ahead of them. They've got prediction markets. They want to get into mortgages. They want to do all kinds of stuff. You've got Vlad talking about trying to open up the private market. They're just putting anything out there to see what sticks, and they are improving themselves a lot. So I think that they have a really, really compelling story. I like Hood quite a lot.
I absolutely love them as well. I mean, I think from the CEO on down, they've done an absolutely magnificent job. As a matter of fact, kind of kicking myself had some conversations with them as a group, and I'm going back like 6-8 years ago. What a mistake that was. That was maybe now probably one of my worst trades by not executing a trade and doing something with that one. But that's okay. Things happen. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Hey, let's jump in real quick into the NFL. We got two things real quick. The NFL. What has every general manager in the NFL finally figured out and pulled their head out of their rear end? I'll tell you what it is. Running backs do matter. Everybody was saying, you know what? It's a passing league. It's a passing league. Well, all you got to do is go back to the Super Bowl and take a look at the running backs. Look at the playoffs. Look at all the big running backs that were so good. And the reason why those teams won games, they were able to burn off the clock. They could do all these wonderful things. Well, they finally pulled their head out, like I said. And I think going into this year, it might be the biggest year for running backs in a heck of a long time to go in the first round. Here's some of the names. Ashton Genty. This is the kid out of Boise State. He is big, thick, strong. I highly recommend that if you're a big football fan, whoever your team is, and if you're picking anywhere in the top 5 or maybe top 10, he's going to be in there. He's absolutely amazing. He took second in the Heisman Trophy. Then you've got Amari Hampton from North Carolina, absolute beast. You've got this kid out of Iowa, Caleb Johnson, who, again, 6'1", 225-pound kid, not an ounce of fat on him, and he can run the football. Junkins, who's at Ohio State, and Henderson, also from Ohio State. These guys are absolutely amazing players, and I think it's going to be very fun this go around when the draft comes around to see if the rest of the league has figured out that running backs do matter and they're actually worth it. Now, they can't run past about 30 years old, except for, the king himself. But outside of that, most of them, the first 3, 4, 5 years of the NFL are definitely worth the first round pick. And I think you're going to see a lot of those, Justin.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every single part of the team matters a ton. And I think that if I was setting up an NFL draft team, I would absolutely try to get some of those guys that you just mentioned. Yeah,
they're great. They're impressive. They're a lot of fun to watch. All right. Here's something that's both great and impressive and a little depressing. I'm going to hit a little quick on Major League Baseball. Average salary just jumped above $5 million for an average player in Major League Baseball. That's pretty amazing. Then you look over at Stevie Cohen and what he's doing with the Mets. This guy is doing everything a fan. If you're a fan of the Mets, you should be the happiest people in the world. Not because you've won it, but because at least your owner is giving you all the opportunity in the world, because this guy, basically billions, has gone out there and said, what do we need? Okay, we're going to sign Soto. Okay, he's making $61.9 million a year with his latest contract. Not so bad. Seems like a pretty good deal. Matter of fact, the entire team, $322 million on their payroll. 322. Dodgers are 319. Not so bad. Another million. You know what the Marlins are paying? $64.9 million total. That's almost what Soto's getting for the Mets. And this is the entire total of what they've got. So I think it's really interesting. Baseball's an interesting spot. I think if they were smarter, they would start thinking about the idea of maybe there's a cap on the top end, but maybe there's also a cap of some sort, or some sort of a spot where they've got to at least pay a certain number. I don't know what that number is. Maybe it's 100 million, whatever it is. But I think right now, if you're allowing some of these guys just to kind of ride along on the coattails, I don't think that's so great for the fan base down there in Miami. I think they're probably pretty ticked off about this. 15 players over $30 million a year going in baseball right now. Pretty amazing what's going on the top as well as the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a bunch to say about this. First of all, off screen, I talked to Pete about this, and you were like, oh, well, some people say that football players are overpaid. And then you were talking about the average life expectancy of some of these football players and how it's relatively low. And, I just said then what I'll say now, which is, what do you quantify the value of that lifetime that you might lose at the end of this? I don't really think that sports players are overpaid at all. And the other thing that I would just note is that you were talking about the Marlins. I have the list here of 2024. The Oakland A's were paying their whole payroll was $47 million, $47,270,000. They are the lowest paying team, dramatically below the next one on the slot. Last thing, quick fun fact for you, since we're talking about pay, and obviously this statistic is kind of dumb because it doesn't account for the actual salary, but do you know how much Super Bowl champs each receive when they win the Super Bowl, or when they most recently won?
It's a low number. I know that, relative to what they get paid right throughout the year. But that's a really good point, because, okay, your contract is for the 17 games, right? The playoffs and everything else is a totally different thing. That everybody gets the same amount. I don't know. What is it, man? I'm curious as hell now.
So it's 171,000, but that's not the fun fact. The fun fact is 171,000 for the Super Bowl champs when you win. The winner of this year's Madden tournament will win 250,000. It's more than the Super Bowl champs who are actually playing the game.
Oh, that is amazing. That's a great fun fact. I really like that one. See, guys, what I said? I mean, this guy is brilliant and he's outstanding. We really appreciate you, Justin, especially last minute jumping in. You're awesome. Really appreciate that. Folks, have a great day of trading. Look for anything that can give you any tips about what's going to happen tonight, because the Trump tariffs, this is when it happens. Giddy up. See you later.
See ya.